There is one story I love when it comes to talking about vision and direction setting, and that is the race to the South Pole. There were two men racing to the South Pole, but the way they went about it was completely different. And in this case, it either ended up in success or death. To be a leader is to move in a direction. We need to know where we are going. It is like firing an arrow. We must first aim before we pull back and shoot it forward. To understand where we're going, we need vision. Vision is an intention towards the future. And to do that, we look to our intuition. I've said this in a video before. Data is the language of the past, and data is the language of the present. It can tell us where we've been and where we are right now. Intuition is the language of the present and the language of the future. What does that mean? So think about looking at your bank account. If you look at the transactions of the past, that data tells you about what happened in the past. If you look at what's happening right now, the number of what's in your savings right now, then data tells you about the present. Intuition tells us about the present because we reach out with our senses, reach out into the feeling of the now. Intuition also extends into the future. It's about recognizing patterns, having a sense, a feel for something that will happen. So when we ask for a vision, we're really asking for an intuition, a feeling of the direction we're going to go in. Intuition is great at setting that direction. Now, we must use the future responsibly. When we set this intention, we don't get hooked into it. We don't become obsessed with the outcome. Intention is just how we can direct our gaze. It is about calibrating where we want to go. And then as we take a step forward, we get information and feedback from our environment. We fold it in, and then we can redirect our vision once again. Vision is not about this is what I have to do, this is what must happen. Instead, it's just the direction I go in. This is probably an outdated example, but I'm at the mall and I get hungry. So I'm going to head towards the food court. That's an intention, that's a direction. Now, I might say, I'm going to get Chik-Fil-A. I have to get Chik-Fil-A. And I get so obsessed with getting Chik-Fil-A. And I forget that it's Sunday. So I get to my end goal, which is the food court, and it's Sunday and I can't get food. Whereas if I just say, I would like to set the intention of going to the food court to get food for myself, once I'm there, then I can see my options. Then I can still fulfill the direction I'm moving in with getting hyper obsessed with what I specifically eat. So we need direction and intention to move us, but we don't get hung up on what the end result will necessarily be. Because we're sensing the future, we're feeling, and feelings are transitory. It means that our emotions and feelings can move us, but they're not facts. They're not the best thing to hang our hat on. So let's use our intuition to move us, but then make decisions as we get new information. There is one story I love when it comes to talking about vision and direction setting, and that is the race to the South Pole. There were two men racing to the South Pole. From Norway, there was Roald Amundsen, and from Britain was Robert Scott. The two men wanted to be the first to get to the South Pole, and so they organized teams and resources to get to the South Pole first. But the way they went about it was completely different, and in this case, it either ended up in success or death. So they both shared a common vision. I'm going to get to the South Pole first. But the direction they set, the priorities they set, the strategy was different. For Amundsen, there was two priorities. Two things that he focused on completely and utterly. The first was getting to the South Pole, which might sound obvious, but just wait a second. The second one was safety. He wanted to ensure the safety of himself and his crew. Every decision Amundsen made, he filtered through these two criteria. Will we be safe? Can we get to the South Pole? Everything else was completely disregarded. He had a hyper focus on this goal. So what did this look like in practice? Amundsen was adaptable, which means that he chose a small crew of 5 men. He also spoke to the indigenous population and learned how to use sled dogs, sleds, wear furs, and eat penguin meat to ward off scurvy. When he tried to embark on his expedition at first, the temperature dropped so quickly and so fast that he chose to retreat. He went back to base camp and waited for the temperature to go back up. He was just prioritizing safety and efficacy at all costs. And so he's willing to adapt and try anything in the pursuit of that goal. Let's contrast with Scott. So our British friend, he had other priorities. He wanted to get to the South Pole, but he also wanted to conduct scientific research. So he brought a huge research team. He had 16 guys with him and all the resources and supplies for 16 men. He thought that using dogs was unsportsmanlike, and so he used Manchurian ponies instead. He also wanted to keep up British decorum, and so he chose to wear traditional British wool. Amundsen even tried to give Scott advice. Even though they were competing, he said, don't bring science on board, don't do the research, and drop all of this decorum stuff. Just focus on the mission. But Scott was undeterred. He had his mental construction of what it should be, and then decided to live in that reality instead of what would actually work. Think about it once more. The vision to get to the South Pole, the direction they set, Amundsen, safety, efficacy. But for Scott, he's focusing on decorum, science, making sure to be sportsmanlike, and so he's juggling all these different priorities, and he can't figure out what's actually going to get him to the South Pole. In leadership, in setting a direction, we have two tools. These are metaphors. We have a compass and we have a map. A compass points us in the direction. So if we want to go true north, or in the case of our explorer friends, they want to go true south, we help use a compass to move us in that direction. But a compass doesn't tell us what we're going to find along the way. If we just keep going straight, we're going to run into obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. A map helps us orientate. It shows us all the obstacles in our way. Avoid this pitfall, avoid that pitfall. We can see everything in front of us and move around it. But a map doesn't necessarily tell us where we should go. It just shows us the field in front of us. So we need both the compass and the map to be able to navigate. Amundsen metaphorically and probably literally used both the compass and the map. And so he took unexpected routes. He knew where he was going, but he was okay going out of direction, going a little bit more circuitously to get where he needed to go. And again, he prioritized getting there and safety. And ultimately, he was the first to get to the South Pole. He won the race. The journey turned out much worse for Scott. The ponies froze and died. He had mechanized sleds and they stopped working. His crew started to experience frostbite and eventually started to die. The clothing that they wore was not appropriate for the journey. They started to experience malnourishment, scurvy, and the team fell apart. Scott eventually did reach the South Pole, but a full month after Amundsen. The return trip can only be described as sheer hell. Scott and his men kept plodding along, but because of the delay, because of all the equipment and extra resources they had to carry with them, because of their team falling apart, they ended up being in the South Pole when the temperature started to plummet once again. People started to die, frostbite was rampant, and their numbers dwindled again and again. One severely frostbitten man told the remaining group, "I'm just going outside and maybe some time." He left the tent and vanished. Never seen again. A few days later, Scott wrote in his diary, "We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more." This was his last journal entry, found many months later. Scott and all his men died, never reaching base camp. The direction we set matters. How we do things matters. The priorities we take matter. In this case, it was literally life and death. In other cases, it is also success or failure. So as we set out to do something, we need to ensure that the way we're moving about it, the vision we set, the direction we set, the priorities are aligned. That we are really taking this bow and arrow and making sure that when we fire it, its direction is true. We need to align our incentives, we need to align our desires, our direction, and go in a common way. When we cannot do this, everyone is doing their own thing, just doing their own individual desires, their own selfishness, and moving in totally random ways. That is not how a team operates. It's not how an organization should operate. And it's not how a country should operate. We should be trying to move in a common direction with each other.